Good evening, everybody. All right. So, good evening, everybody. I welcome you all to this fantastic speakers session, Step by Step to Google, brought to you by the collaboration of four Google Developer Student Clubs, that is MIT Manipal, JK Institute of Applied Physics and Technology, Birla Institute of Technology Jaipur, and Government College of Engineering and Textile Technology Bahrampur. I welcome all my fellow GDSC leads, namely Kritika Joshi, Shagun Mittal, Radheshri, and myself, and all the people from the four institutes who have taken out the time to learn something new and enriching today. We are thrilled to have you with us. Today, we have one of the most fantastic speakers who is a shooting star of the tech world, quite some experience working with Google. She is also a very beloved friend of ours, and it's an honor to have her. Let's welcome Divina Pooja John, who was a former STEP intern and an upcoming SWE intern at Google. Before I give her the mic, let's understand a little more about STEP. Well, the Google STEP internship is basically an internship offered by Google, and it is primarily for the second year students. It also open to underrepresented second year university students who come from the computer science or related field backgrounds. It comprises of like software projects, skill training, development, and all the things. You can go through the slide here, and it clearly says that you need to have good coding skills. And being a step intern has an amazing advantage, and it opens new doors to all the people who get into this. The program also includes technical talks, mentorship with Google engineers, and opportunities for social activities, community building, and networking. So, without any further ado, I would give the mic to Kritika, who would proceed with the session further.
Thank you, Shreyashi, for that great information about the STEP internship. Moving on, I'll just talk about the minimum qualifications and the preferred qualifications for getting into STEP. First of all, you should be a second year female undergraduate student in technology, obviously, majoring in computer science or related technical fields. You should have experience in one or more general purpose programming languages, and you should have the ability to communicate in English fluently. We can also go through the preferred qualifications here. A, a big part of the preferred qualification says that you should have the ability to complete a full-time 10 to 12-week internship between May and August 2024. Moving on to the most interesting part, obviously. I would like to take this honor to introduce you to the speaker for today, Divina Pooja John. She has been a former STEP intern, and she has even grabbed a return internship offer at Google. She is also a fellow Google Talent Split Women Engineer Scholars. A fun fact, all four of GDSC leads who have collaborated for this event, we all four are the Google Women Talent Sprint Women Engineer Scholar from cohort 4. She is also a Microsoft Learn student ambassador, a technical head at IEEE WIE, Johns Hopkins Heath Scholar. I am remarkable facilitator and a third year CSC undergrad at VIT Vellore. That's literally a lot to talk about when it comes to a third year undergrad student. Divina, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Kritika. Thank you so much for the introduction. Both you and Tracy put together quite an introduction. And as you mentioned, we're all we scholars and we're quite good friends. So it's really nice to see this collaboration between four GDSEs, which is quite a feat. And really excited for the session today, and hope everyone will gain some value out of it. All right. So I think we can get started with the session. So how we'll be proceeding is we'll be looking at the timeline and then going a bit more deeper into each aspect of the application process. And in the end, we'll of course have a question and answer session where all of you can be sharing what concerns or any doubts that you have, and I'll be addressing that. So Shagun, can we go to the next slide? All right. So first, let's talk about the application process and, in specific, the timeline of the application process. So Many of you might be knowing that the applications for STEP 2024 are out, that is for the next year. So, the last date of application is mentioned in the website itself. So, you apply through the portal called as Google Careers page. It's a little bit different if your college has on campus recruitment. So you might want to check with your college if Google comes to you on campus. If that is the case, then you'll be receiving a mail directly from your university placement cell and you'll have to apply through them. But in the case that you are applying off campus, which majority of our colleges fall into that category, then you will be having to fill this form on the official page. So, what do you have to fill in the initial application? You have to submit your resume and your academic transcripts, and they'll ask you a little bit more details about your grade history and your contact details just for being in touch for the further process. After that, there is a round called as Google Online Coding Challenge. And this particular round is a coding contest. Many of you might be familiar with Lead Code or Codeforces, CodeChef, competitive coding platforms. It's quite similar to those contests which take place there. It's a 1 hour contest. Usually, it might be 45 minutes in certain cases, but it's usually 60 minutes, and you get two questions. And there'll be multiple test cases which you have to pass. So that is the Google Online Challenge. And if you get shortlisted in that round, then you get called for the interviews. So in STEP, you have two interviews, which are one is the both are technical rounds itself. There are no HR rounds or rounds where they ask you about your projects in detail. It's just DSA based interviews. And there are the first one is usually on linear data structures, second one a bit more higher data structures. So that is the final round, and then you will get your email about selection or rejection. So as it's mentioned in the timeline, because your applications have started now, until Jan 19th, if I'm not wrong, you might want to check again in the page because sometimes they change the date as well. Jan 14th or Jan 19th, I'm not too sure, that would be the last date. And after that your GOC will go out. Sometimes it also happens that even before the last date of the application you might get an invite for doing the GOC, because they do process it in a rolling basis. So maybe before that itself you get your GOC, but once your GOC happens, it might take up to a month. So for me it took about a month after my GOC for me to get the interview call. And again, after the interview, my interviews were done, it took me another month for me to hear back about the results of my internship. So that timeline is a bit varying, but based on the previous, it's predicted that that your interviews will happen in Jan Feb, and your results will be released in Feb March. So these are just tentative dates, but just keep a tab on what's going on around. Usually, the process for on campus happens before. So, if you happen to have any friends who have on campus selection, then maybe you want to keep in touch with them. So, okay, let's go ahead with the first round. So, you might be wondering, you're just a second year student, what do they expect from you, or what are they shortlisting based on in the first round of selection? So, it's primarily based on the profile that you built for yourself over the last 2 years, and in certain cases before that as well. So, because you do not have any experience, and let me be very clear, they do not look for experience. So, you don't need to worry that you haven't done an internship so far, or you haven't got any kind of, industrial tie-ups or projects. That's not what they're looking for. They're not looking for any experience. If you do happen to have done internships, then great, please do mention it in your resume. But they're more interested in how you're building yourself as a programmer and your interests. So um, projects is an important session that they will section of your resume that they will look at. You may have worked on certain projects in your high school as well if you had taken up computer science then, and I'm sure they would have been smaller or even large projects that you've done in your 2 years of engineering. So do mention all the projects that you've worked on. And one thing we have to be a little bit careful while mentioning the project is you can't mention it as a very general description, because that doesn't give the person who's shortlisting, going through the resumes, a good idea about what you did, right? So there's something that our corporate skills mentor had taught us in the we program, that you have to quantify your contributions and the impact that it had made. So instead of saying, okay, let's say you have an app which is a comprehensive health profile app, which helps you to, let's say, keep in track of your fitness and your medicines and all of that. If you can very easily write 4 lines about the app, but instead you can talk about how you designed and implemented, let's say, the disease preventing feature of the app, which captures the disease almost, let's say, 6 months in advance, which has a high success rate for calculating the disease 6 months in advance, or it can even be expected. It doesn't have to, you don't have to have data to back it up. So because uh, you're not making any real world claim, or it's not going out, so you can say it is expected to catch the disease 6 months before the onset. And it has, if I'm using ML for it, the ML model has an accuracy of 97-99%. So if you mention it in such a way, even though you write like 1 line about it, that 1 line has a lot for the interview, for the recruiter to go about, instead of just talking about it in general. So that is something you might want to keep in check when you are building your resume and mentioning your projects. Other things which you can mention in your resume, which will really highlight your interest in tech, are, let's, coding competitions, um, or hackathons or ideathons. So these, taking part in all of these competitions shows that you are putting an effort which it goes beyond your regular academic curriculum to, pursue your interest in tech, which is good and which is great actually. And because most of you who are attending the session, I'm sure, will be a part of GDSC as well. So do mention that in your resume, that you are a part of this technical chapter. Mention whichever domain you are working under and what work you've done in a line or two. So all of these things, if you don't mention, thinking it doesn't really fall into the category of experience or education, uh, that will not, it's not right. That's not the right way to go about it. You do need to mention every single step you've taken to build yourself, to have that professional profile that you have today. So they don't expect too much, but whatever you have, you should present it nicely and in the correct manner. Now, resume, a lot of people tend to make the mistake of making the resume in very, I would say, shoddy editors like Word, or I don't know, some people, they just use even more uh, simpler text editors, which, what happens is the alignment goes haywire, and it doesn't give a professional appearance. So something that I personally used was Overleaf. It has great templates, and also, it's basically, the template is written in code, which means you have a lot of flexibility to even modify the template and make it better. So I personally used Overleaf, and I combined 2 to 3 different templates that I liked, and I finally came up with something that I was happy with. And one thing that it ensures is that the alignment is right, and it looks, the spacing is even, so you don't have to too much worry about that, because that's already taken care for you. You just need to make sure the code is fine. And you also have this thing about linking your profile, like your LinkedIn profile or your GitHub profile. So that is something that will be beneficial, because if you just give a link which is just plain text, then the recruiter will have to go click on it and go to a new tab, paste it, which probably is not worth the effort, and they wouldn't do that. But instead, if you just have a little LinkedIn icon or a GitHub icon, it's very easy for them to click, and they just need to click the back button to go back to your resume, and they can quickly take a look at um, let's say projects, or you can they can look at your LinkedIn page about your post. So you might want to add that. That's a very beneficial feature. In case you have 2 to 3 different projects, I would say you can individually hyperlink them. Just add a little GitHub icon next to the project title, and you'll be good to go. Apart from that, do mention your achievements, any kind of academic awards, or even extracurricular awards that you have. Mention it in terms of relevance and in terms of um, timeline. So whatever is most recent comes first, be it in your education section, your college education, you have to mention first your graduation dates and your GPA. After that comes your school education. So, and even in your projects, the most recent project comes first. In certain cases, your best project can also come first. That's not too strict over there, but it's typically followed that you go in reverse chronological order. And yeah, and apart from that, what else is your achievements also follow the same route. So your college achievements come first and then followed by your school achievements. Because this is step and it's your second year internship, you can mention your school things as well. But in typically when you go to your third year, they tend to look down on that practice, and they expect you to just mention college achievements and college relevant information. Another profile section of your resume that many people don't really have is the skills section. So it's very helpful for a recruiter or a technical leader to just look at your skills section and get an idea about what technologies you're comfortable with and to what extent. So whichever programming languages you know, just mention under the skills section what are all programming languages you know, in order of your proficiency, whatever you're very comfortable with in the front, with the level of comfort you are. So let's say I'm a beginner in Java and I'm very proficient in Python. Of course, I need to mention Python first, and I need to mention that I'm proficient and comfortable with Python. So in the case of in the interview, if they pull up your resume, and let's say they don't know which programming language to ask you, they'll if by looking at your resume they'll get an idea that okay, Python is the one she's comfortable with, let's go with that. Otherwise you might be in a tough spot if you claim to know all the languages well. So just be very honest in your resume, but also um, you should write it in such a way that it highlights your candidacy, like highlights that you're a strong candidate. So that those are the only things. And of course there's formatting, bolding of lines, underlining where it's required to make it look better. So I just shared a few of my tips and what I have learned in building your resume, what's important, what's not, what are the skills, and what are the sections to have. Now once you are done with your resume, I would highly suggest that you get it reviewed by someone, because there are many times where there are mistakes in our own resume, and even after reviewing it 100 times we don't look at it from that angle. So it's useful if you can get it reviewed by your college seniors or your professors, or someone in the tech industry who you know and are connected to. You can ask them to review it for you. So that will be something which will give you a fresh perspective and also a clear assessment of how strong your resume is. So those are the only things which come to my mind about resume shortlisting and building your profile. And I think profile building is not a constant, like it's not a one-time thing that you look at only when you have to fill in an application form. It's something that you constantly work towards. So many of you might be thinking of some of the things that I said, like, oh my God, I don't even have this. Like, let's say if you haven't participated in any hackathons, or if you didn't do any coding competitions, or you haven't started on a project, you might be feeling, okay, I haven't done this. How do I even mention it? But you should understand that applications for jobs and internships keep on coming, and it's not a fixed thing. That step is not the only thing, it's in fact the only the first thing. So if there is something that you find lacking in your profile now, do work on it. And even step, I think there are a couple of weeks you have the time, in case you don't have any projects, to at least build some basic projects and to put it on your resume. So focus a little bit more, look at this entire profile building thing and focus on it as more of a long term exercise and not just a one time application process thing. So if you start working on it from now, it by the time SWE comes, you might have a really strong profile. And even after that, if even if let's say you get step and SWE, it's an ongoing process. You have to constantly build your profile. So please look at it with that kind of a mindset and not that I need to crack this internship, so I need to work on it right now. So those are the only things about profile building and resume shortlisting. Now let's talk a little bit about the second round of the selection process. So that is the Google Online Coding Challenge. As I mentioned, it's quite similar to the contest that you have. You have two questions. You have an editor where you can choose the language. It's the language is not fixed. Python, C++, C, Java, any language, and even there are many other languages as well. So you can select and you can just code the solution. And this is an auto-corrected round, so nobody's really looking too much into your code quality or I wouldn't even say they're looking into the structure of your code, but it's more like about test case passing. So if you are able to pass test cases, all the test cases in both the rounds, then you'll be sure to get to the next round. Otherwise, you'll only, depending on the test case, number of test cases you clear, you will be clearing it, or they'll place you in a rank list, and then based on that, you hear about your selection or not. So that is how GOC works. It's completely automated round because of the volume of applications they get. How do you practice for a GOC is firstly DSA, because DSA is something that is constant in both your online coding challenge as well as interviews. In fact, I would say 90% of your selection is completely based on your DSA skills itself. So, because of that, I would suggest first build your foundations. Many of you might have had this DSA course in your itself, but that is not enough in terms of an online coding challenge or an interview. You really have to practice about knowing when to identify which data structure to use, and beyond that as well, how to find the best approach. So um, I would say you can get started with LeetCode, which is a really great platform. I personally use LeetCode extensively in my step preparation as well as my sweep preparation. So LeetCode, there are different lists which give you about LeetCode questions in order of the topic. So one particular list that I found which was useful for me in the last, let's say, 10 to 15 days of my preparation was the blind 75 list. So this list is a list of the top 75 interview questions. So typically when you have a lesser time or you have a fixed date in mind, let's say because when your applications come out, you want to focus your preparation in a more structured way, right? You don't want to go about answering all kinds of questions and getting lost. So this thing that helped me keep in track, like it has 4 to 5 questions on each topic, and the more difficult topic have more questions. So it gave me structure to really complete all of my topics and get a good revision out of it. And even but you might be having this question of, okay, we have the structure and we have the list of questions we have to go through, but what if you get stuck on a question that you don't have any approach to solve a question? How do you go about that situation? So there's one way that most people go about it, that is they go to the solutions and they see someone who has already done it, right? But the loophole in this approach is that you will know how to solve that question. But if you ask a similar approach question, then you might again get confused because of the wording and how it is phrased and how it seems. So instead of that, there is something else which worked for a lot of people. I've spoken to see, even when I was in your position, I spoke to a lot of people who have actually done it. And something that they should help me, and I would like to share it with you. You can There's something called intuition. That is, when you look at a question, get the ideas about how to solve it, and you know the different methodologies of solving it. Let's say you see an arrays question, and you get to know that this can be done using sliding window. It's not something that has a textbook formula attached to it. Like, you, they don't teach you in universities, if this is the word that is used, it's a sliding window question. No, it, you get to know by reading different questions and understanding the solution in an in-depth fashion, right? So for that, Neat Code is a YouTube channel which helped me a lot. So there he explains it in such a manner that you first read the question, and then he explains the intuition or the thought process you get while you read the question. And then he goes to the code. So what happens when I had absolutely no idea about what I had to do in a particular situation? I went and watched the Neat Code video for that question in Blind 75. And for Blind 75, every single question has a video. And I stopped at the point where he explains the intuition, and I tried to write the code by myself. So at least some of it is going into my mind, and I'm not like completely blindly copying the code, right? If for a question that I don't know. So that's something. And over time, what happened, what I noticed was I didn't need to even look at the intuition. Like, I had my own intuition, and I just needed to glance through it to verify whether my approach was right and if there were other approaches of doing it. So that is something you can also try. It depends on the programming language that you're using. If you're using Python, then Neat Code is great. If you're using C++, then Take You Forward is a YouTube channel which is recommended. And Java, there's Kunal Kushwaha. But again, you might want to talk with people who've actually done it in Java and C++ for more resources in those languages. I personally did it in Python. And yeah, so that's all about GOC we have. It's a 60 minutes, two question coding challenge, and it's based on the number of test cases you pass, you get shortlisted. So doing the weekly contests in Lead Code really helped me to get an idea of timing and test case passing. Some people don't, who are not even familiar with these platforms, you might be thrown off by the concept of test cases and how it works internally. So it's really a good idea if you do these weekly coding contests. That's what helped me. And I think let's just go to the final round of the selection process right now. That is the interviews. Yeah. So Google interviews are quite different than regular interviews. Of course, I'll not be mentioning the questions because that's not allowed, but I'll just talk about how I prepared for the interviews. So, what is different in preparation from for the GOC and for the regular for the interviews, right? Because both of them are DSA based, and both of them are quite um, heavy on your intuition and problem solving. But one thing that is different is in GOC specifically, you just have to solve the question. They don't look too much into your approach, right? But in an interview, they are interested in how you arrived at your approach. So in the question that I was asked, I there were many ways of solving it. If you know about the term brute force, that is the most simplest solution to a problem. So that is usually the least efficient approach as well. So had this practice when I solved a question which was, let's say, a medium level question. I would first think of the most basic thing, that is the brute force approach, and then try to optimize it. That is, come up with an approach which would be more efficient in terms of time complexity or space complexity. And after that, there is also a most optimized approach in many cases. Many cases, especially the one questions they ask you in interviews, it's not a single approach question. They tend to ask you questions which can be dealt with in different angles. So what I did was, when I was solving regular questions in my personal practice on Lead Code, I just took a book and I wrote three different approaches for the question. And which was, let's say, one approach, the more optimized one has a time complexity of n square, and the most optimized one has O of n, but the brute force has O of n cube. So I just practiced um, going about questions in such a manner that it naturally came to me: brute force, more optimized, most optimized. And when you come walk the interviewer through the process of how you arrived at your solution, it's much, they get a much better idea of how you think. And instead, if you just tell them the most optimized approach directly, they might think that, okay, she's just seen this question before and she's repeating what she's seen, and she didn't really understand it. That's a very common thing that can happen. And even though you do everything correctly, because they didn't really get the opportunity to know your thought process that well, it would result in them having lesser information about you as a candidate, right? So it's important to first talk with the interviewer, explain the approach. In many cases, you might be missing something. And by just explaining your approach and your thought process, the interviewer will give you certain clues. They won't tell you that you're wrong or you're right. They'll just tell me you, like, they might just tell you stuff like, what about this case? So then you have to think more about why they would ask that question, and then course correct in case you're going off track, and come up with the best solution. So that's how the interview works. It's more like a conversation between you and your interviewer. And it's not just for Google. Every big company there is, the process is pretty much the same. So one thing that many people tend to think is that the interview is about arriving at the right answer and writing the right code. It's much more than that. It's about helping the interviewer understand how you are thinking and how you're arriving. Sometimes, even though your answer is wrong, they would be impressed by the way you're articulating your solution, and that might help you get selected. And even when you're writing the code, just don't code in a hurry. Like just using variable names like A, B, C, X, Y, Z, which will really not give a good impression, because there's something called as hiring committee in all of the MNCs. So after your code is done, it will be submitted to the hiring committee, and they will go through your code. And those are people who don't know what your interviewer told you, and you're not in front of them to explain your code. So you have to really make sure that your variable names are in such a manner that your code is just self-explanatory and they can easily understand what you're trying to do and how you've done it. So writing clean code is important, and I think that personally gave me an additional um, edge. I think because in my second interview the question was quite hard, and I wasn't able to fully optimize it. But my code was very clean, and even though it was a long code, so I think it was purposely given to confuse a bit more. But just because I think I spent a little bit of time in making sure that it reads well, I think that would have given an additional a few extra brownie points in if I think about it now. And usually the first interview has two questions, second interview has one or two questions depending on the difficulty of the questions. And the interviews are for 45 minutes each, both of the interviews. The interview, I mean, your recruiter will reach out to you and they'll ask you about when you're free for the interviews, and it will be scheduled after a conversation with you. So you don't need to worry too much about it being in the middle of your exams, or when you have another engagement, because you'll be the one who's choosing the date. Um, Apart from that, I think the only thing is you just need to keep your cool, because a lot of times people who are very very qualified, and many of my friends who prepared extensively, get a little nervous and don't communicate that well during their interviews, because of which they don't end up getting selected, right? So just all the preparation is behind the scenes, and the interview is like your final delivery. The Let's say like, you know how you prepare for an exam and you write the exam. So you just have to make sure you're very calm and you're able to think clearly and communicate well, and not completely blank out or something. So what really helps to prevent worst case scenarios is having a mock interview. So there are websites for doing mock interviews, and if you have someone who is, let's say, a year or 2 years senior to you, someone in their third year, fourth year, who has some interview experience, you can reach out to them and request them to take like a half an hour mock interview for you. So many people will be happy to do that. But you should be prepared before you reach out and ask someone for a mock interview. Just make sure you know what the topics are, and you don't go into it and waste the other person's time or something like that. So yeah, that's pretty much it about interviews. So I have explained the process and how things work, and also how you can go about preparing for it. um, Now let me tell you a little bit about how I personally prepared for step, uh, because that's something that was requested. Shagun, can we please go to the next slide? Yeah. My personally, I got to know about STEP around June or July of my second year of college. And I started preparing a little bit. Like I started doing my lead code regularly from then onwards, and I was brushing on DSA. I took a lot of time with DSA because the way they did it in my college, I wasn't really able to understand too well. So I went right from the basics. I erased how I did all the theory, and then like linked lists and all. I learned how to implement each feature, the trees and graphs. So what happens is once you start solving questions, you kind of don't really implement the entire data structure. You just implement what feature you require, right? So one thing that I did was start from the basics and took a while with the basics. So that helped me understand the more difficult questions better. um, but I don't think I personally prepared for like 6 to 7 months. But I don't think that much time is required. I took it really slow, and I also had like a bunch of other things like college exams and semester in between, which I'm sure a lot of you also have. So you don't need to worry too much if your preparation is not done, because most of my best preparation was probably once the application came out. The last 2 months was my really good preparation. Before that, it was getting the basics clear, getting familiar with the format. I'd done mock interviews, and I had done a lot of contests by then. Like every weekend I was giving contests, so I was familiar with the format. But I had to really become more sharp about how to solve the questions. So that's what I focused on in my last 2 months. I was, as I told you, I was doing the blind 75, and I was following the neat code YouTube playlist. Apart from that, I was reading this book called Cracking the Coding Interview. I didn't read the entire book, but I read the part about how to approach interviews, and they even have these little notes on the different data structures, which helped me. So if you want to go about reading that, I wouldn't say just leave everything and read that book. But if you have, let's say, half an hour every night, then probably reading that book is something you can spend time in. Apart from that, yeah, lead code was the main thing in my preparation journey. What worked, what did not. So what did not work was doing theory completely, and then the approach of doing theory, like let me do all the data structures once and then I'll start coding. That is something that is quite promoted in terms of these online courses that you have, also DSA courses. They go about a lot in detail in theory about a data structure, and then they dump a lot of questions together in the end, which is something that I tried, did not work. It is quite counterproductive actually. So you guys might want to take a step back and see if it's actually working for you, if that's something that you are have been doing. Because okay, the Namrata is just asking me for the name of the book. It's called Cracking the Coding Interview. I will just write it down. Yeah. um yeah, so doing the theory and solving questions goes hand in hand. That is something that I learned that works for me. So you learn about how, let's say, linked lists work, and then you go and do a question about reversing linked lists, or re- let's say adding two linked lists in increasing order. You do questions like that, and then you get a more clear idea about how to operate on linked lists, how they work. Instead, if you just spend 2 days reading about linked lists and then going ahead and then trying to solve question, you will not really get that connect between the theory and actually applying. So try to do it side by side. When you're doing the theory about it, try to do the easier problems, and then once you're comfortable with it, go ahead with the more medium and difficult problems that you have. So that is something that I learned, which did not work for me, and then I had to find a way to make things work. And challenges is definitely the timing of it, because I remember I was so confused about when my interviews will be, when my GOC will be. I had NSEMs going on, I had other college exams, so I was very, very confused about what I should focus on at a given point. I would say what I learned is you need to try to focus on what you do know. So, like, you do not know that when your like step interview is going to be. In fact, I got information of my interview being scheduled 1 month after I gave my GOC. So that is like a huge waiting period. You don't know if you're selected. If you don't know if you don't know if you cleared the GOC, you don't know if you're rejected. So that's quite a bit of a nerve wracking period. But I think what worked is being consistent in your preparation. Don't get disheartened even if you get a rejection. Like, let's say your GOC or your interview did not go that great. It doesn't mean that you should completely give up on your preparation. Continue preparing. If not for step, there are many other opportunities which will come shortly after. So it's a good idea to keep that practice going so that you gain the best out of this preparation experience that you have, right? So that is something that I learned. If you have college exams, I realized that it was so important. Those college grades were so important for me to get some permissions later on to attend the internship. So make sure you do your college exams as good as well, and not just completely let that go, and focus completely on your DSA prep and things. It's important that you maintain your GPA as well for getting permissions and having meeting the eligibility criteria with respect to college. Google is quite lenient with respect to all of that, but sometimes college expects you to hold certain academic standards before giving you permission to attend internships. So make sure you're meeting all of those and not creating getting any problem from your college later on. So when you have NSEMs, prepare for your NSEMs. When you have your interview, prepare for your interview. In case they both coincide, don't fret too much. Just give the interview in the most um, calm mind possible, and don't get too frantic about it. So you can never control, but that was a big challenge for me, just the anticipation of it all. So I would say don't have too much high expectations, but just focus on your preparation, not on anything else. That is what ultimately matters. So it's easier to say, but getting carried away might result in some bigger losses. So don't get carried away in case you completely focus on step, you completely and you stop preparing for college. That's not the way. Or you completely focus on college and give up on your step preparation. That is also not great. So just try to keep a balance and have um, an open mind towards working and how you deal with your challenges when you're working as well, because it's not going to be a very smooth DSA journey for anyone. I've heard some people are great at it from the get-go, which is great, but usually there will be a period where you feel like nothing is being solved, and it's very, very difficult for you to come up with the approaches. I would say everyone goes through that period, so don't get disheartened, but just be consistent, and then you will start gaining confidence as and when you are able to solve questions on your own. So that's about it of my personal journey. Now let's go to this segment that all of you have been um, waiting for, I would say, in a sense, that how the actual experiences, that is, okay, you work really hard, you get the step internship. How is it in real life, like the actual internship experience? It's great. Yeah, I was saying that this is not like a project which you just put on your resume, that, like, how the projects that never get have any connection to the real world production of things. Instead, it's a project that's it's a small part of what your company does, right? Which is really, really cool, because it has real life application, and you're working with people who are actually putting things into production. So the experience is really great. You get to learn a lot. I would say there's no way to prepare for it in any sense, because be it Google or Microsoft or Amazon, all of them have internal tech stacks which they use. So when you go, you're going to be completely thrown off by what is happening around you. But that's the beauty of it. Then you get to learn it right from the scratch, and then you get to implement small small things, and then you get to implement an entire project, which is really cool. The culture at Google in specific is great. Everyone is very helpful. Nobody just treats you like, okay, you're an intern, you don't know anything. They are willing to learn from your perspective. They want to know how you think, and you get a seat at the table. It's and they value what you have to say. But as an intern, obviously, you're the one who is learning most, because the people you're working with, your manager is someone who has a lot of experience, and the way it things work is in corporate world is quite different from your college. So it's like every moment you're learning something new. You're being put in a new world, which is very interesting. And the Google culture, googliness, everyone is kind, everyone is supportive, inclusive. So you're gonna have a great time. And of course, there's free food. There are a lot of swags, and you have events where you get to network with other interns, and offsites and team outings, which is really great. Projects are all um, on internal products itself. I personally worked in Google Cloud, and everyone will get assigned a different product, and that's how it works. So yeah, that's about the Google Step experience, and you should definitely. It's something that is worth all the effort, is what I would say. Okay, let's just go to the last segment, that is your question and answers.
Yeah.
So
Thank you, Divina, for
yeah,
all the great, intuitive and informative session. I think you pretty much covered everything in great detail. So we'll just open up the platform for everyone to ask their questions. For the time being, I'll just ask few questions that were asked when you were discussing about the other steps. So one is it okay if we mention the highest SGPA in the resume?
highest SGPA, you have to mention your CGPA actually, not for a particular semester, but for the entire duration up until your application period. So your most latest transcripts have to be uploaded for them to verify. So if you mention something different in your form and your transcripts indicate something different, that will lead to a discrepancy. So whatever your CGPA is, just mention that.
So one is while adding the technologies, how much level of learning should we have approximately to mention it in the resume?
I mean, if they ask you some basic questions about it, you should be able to answer. It should not be something that you read once in an article or a talk and you just mentioned it because you found it interesting. You should have worked with it, and you should have, even if you did not completely successfully implement a project, you should have worked with it for sufficient time. And if they ask you what you did and what you learned from that experience, you should be able to talk. So if you're able to do that, then it's all right. But it should not just be something that you heard or did once and then forgot about.
Okay. Can I add my cloned projects on web development in my resume, or is it not a good approach?
Okay, I'm not too sure about that, how what their policy is on cloned projects. Um, I think you can. It's not something, but just be very clear about what you've done and how if you just, just copied another person's code word to word, then it doesn't have a place in your resume. It doesn't make any sense. But if you built on it and things like if you made changes, or yeah, be very honest about your contribution and your work. I'm not too familiar with how they look at this case, but I would say if even if you do it, to mention it and to mention what your skills are that are being highlighted in that particular project.
Great. Is GOC also for off campus students?
GOC, I was off campus, but it depends again. So there are cases where Google contacts you from your participation in a program or another initiative. Like there is, hackathons and other sessions that they conduct. So if you performed well or participated well in one of those, they might send you an invite through that. And in case you get an invite through that, though one of those programs or hackathons, then you will have a GOC. But if it is completely off campus, as far as I know, you do not have a GOC. On campus, and people who get contacted through Google initiatives have a GOC. GOC for off campus is something I haven't heard of till date, but again, the policies keep changing. Like sometimes the selection process is changed. So uh, I'm not too sure it will be there this year, but last year it wasn't there.
Great. What is the minimum CGPA criteria?
So this is something which was talked about, and they have these information sessions where the recruiters from Google talk about it. They said that their minimum CGPA requirement is 7 plus. They were 7. Yeah, they didn't. They said that's not the only criteria or a disqualifying criteria that they have. They look at your complete profile.
How much do projects matter?
Projects matter a lot, especially in the first round, because that is what they have of you to see. They don't have prior internships or experience to judge you from. So it really matters, and you should try to do some good projects and put it on your resume.
Okay, so this is a bit of a question for experienced step intern itself. Does Google sponsor the travel and visa for step interns?
Well, visa, if you're not from this country, I don't think they give you a visa. So, like if I apply for Google Singapore, or there have been friends of mine who applied for, you know, step internship in other countries, and they don't even get shortlisted. So, internationally applying for a step internship in another country who you are not a national of is something that is not done. It's only for full time jobs that they have this visa concept. For step, there is no visa concept. Yeah, travel for suppose you have to rehabilitate to another city for your step internship. They sponsor you and they give you much more than you need. Yeah,
Great. Is competitive programming a good approach to learning DSA?
this is a very I would say conflicted topic, because there have been people who say competitive programming really helps in your problem solving, which in turn helps you do well in DSA and interviews. Um, I personally tried competitive programming, but it didn't work out too well for me because I was starting to use certain tricks, which are like, short variable names for writing faster code, because of which the quality of my code was decreasing. And I felt I did not, it was a bit confusing for me to navigate both the competitive CP space as well as the um, like lead code space and writing clean code. So I kind of went more into the clean code side of things and decided I'll just focus on my problem solving and not too much into CP and, solving it in the fastest time possible. So it's personally your choice. I don't no, sometimes CP is useful, but it depends. Are you able to maintain the balance of writing code competitively as well as maintaining code quality? It's something you have to decide and ask yourself.
Perfect. Is there any benefit of submitting the application early?
As far as I have heard, yes, because they get thousands and thousands, especially if you're applying off campus. There'll be a lot of applications before on the last date. So it would be more helpful. The people who review your resumes are actual, recruiters, right? So it's better if they review your resume when they have a little bit of a lighter load than when they have to review hundreds of resumes in a day. So I would say it. Everyone says it's better to apply early, so maybe that's what you should be doing.
What level of questions on lead code does Google usually ask?
Medium. They ask lead code medium. They don't ask hard for step. And easy, maybe the more I don't know. They don't think they ask easy as well. They go for medium. In medium, they can ask medium easy, medium hard. But lead code medium is what is asked, as far as I know.
What language would you suggest for DSA?
Okay, this is also a very, very personal question because I do DSA in Python, which is not suggested by many people, but I believed it was better for me because that's what I was comfortable with, and I knew Python extensively from my school days. So it's good. People say Python it doesn't really show off um, your problem solving skills because there are so many built-in functions, so your code becomes easier. But actually, there's much more to that because even in my interview, my you know how you calculate time complexity in Python, the len function, which is typically O of n in C++ or C or Java, to calculate the length of a string, the complexity is O of n. But in Python, it's O of 1. So when you go through your code and okay, one more thing, you really have to focus on time complexity and space complexity when you go through your code in your interview. That is a must. And if you don't, your interviewer will ask you. So when you do that, you should know how each built-in function works internally. Now that is some place where you can go wrong because Python works a little bit differently from other languages. So it comes, some people may be like Python does not show off your knowledge that well, but it has loopholes where you can get caught. So you, whatever language you do the language you're comfortable with, and make sure you are knowing the basics and how that language works internally. So that is where your strong point should be, the your confidence in the language that you've chosen, not because you're just choosing C++ because it is the language for which you get the most resources from, and which is more suited for DSA. So C++ is what most people use, and if you're doing that and if that works for you, that's great. But if that's not your most comfortable language, I would suggest do whatever you're comfortable with in, rather than completely switching over to a language that you don't know in the last 2 months.
Great. Does our resume have to be ATS friendly?
Yes. So what happens is sometimes your company, the company that you're applying for, specify certain instructions. In, like, let's say for Wells Fargo, they have a rule that you have to put your picture on the top right corner, and if your picture is not put, you get immediately rejected. And there are some other companies for which, if you include your picture, you get rejected. So you should be very careful as to what you, like, the robotic selection process of the resume. Um, so, like, Google, personally, what my mentors have told me is that don't include a picture, stick to minimal colors, don't go crazy about the different colors that you use. Black and blue is what um, is important. And because there is also a round of this automated checking, it's useful for you to uh, go with more well defined format.
Perfect. I'm from EC. I don't have any exposure to DSA yet. Is it fine if I start now?
Yeah, I mean, everyone starts somewhere, right? It doesn't mean you shouldn't feel too much overwhelmed. You should start now. And in a way it's good because as CSE folks, what happens usually, we learn DSA wrong, or in a way that is very boring from our CS curriculum, and then we end up learning DSA again. So I would say you don't need to feel behind. You would probably save some time of unlearning and relearning. But it's a bit of a tight spot you're in, because the applications are out. Your GOC is probably just a month or weeks away, and your interview will probably be a month or two away. So don't go slow or leisurely about the preparation if you're targeting step. um, but also don't go completely rushed into it. Just spend some good time, like 2 to 3 days per topic to do the basics right, and then do start solving questions and then go ahead in that manner. You have to find the balance between working on your concepts and solving questions. That is something which is difficult to do in last minute preparation. And just, I would say, you would need to spend a bit more time if you're starting now, anyone who's starting now, rather than someone who started, let's say, months back, right? So give DSA that time, 2 to 3 hours per day, and I think you should be good. I don't think there will be any difference if you work constantly, spending a good amount of time for 2 months. I think that would be still a very good, position that you're in. And even if step doesn't work out, there are many other opportunities. So you should just prepare very well and not look at it as a short term thing, your DSA preparation.
A follow up to that, can I add projects from other domains like robotics, electronics, IoT, etc.?
Yes, that would actually highlight your profile even more, because they have interdisciplinary teams over there in Google. So if you have projects from different domains, that will really highlight as make you more appealing as someone who has a varied skill set.
Does both technical round are totally based on DSA?
Yes.
Are the number of projects on your resume a disqualifying factor?
No, they look at you as an entire profile as a candidate. They don't look at any particular section of your profile or resume and shortlist. So if even if you've done one project but that project is really interesting and you spent a lot of time and got good results, you'll be good to go.
What projects did you have at the time of applying for STEP?
Okay, so the projects that I had three projects. One was before STEP, I had done an internship with folks at IIT Mandi. So I had a research based machine learning project on detection of bone fracture. So that is one project I did. Then I had another project from my school days on building a health application. And my third project was an app to help the visually impaired. It was to help, it was again using ML. It was understanding the surroundings and it involved an NLP component to, it basically help the visually impaired see. So it has a camera, and whatever they point the camera at, it would give a description of what was being seen. So if they're in a road with a traffic light on, it would tell them that there is a green light or a red light ahead. So these were the three projects that I had.
Is it good to add HackerRank star scores to your resume?
Yeah, link it. Link your HackerRank page. Mention your stars in HackerRank and add a link.
Uh, does do the interviewers notice which language you're using, and on the basis of the language do they select you?
No, they're completely not even, they're not even relying on your DSA abilities. They're thinking of how you approach the problem, solve it. So the language does not matter. And the I would say even your, like, they're not looking, they're using DSA as a way to gauge your problem solving skills. So definitely language does not matter.
uh, what part should we focus on more, the data structure or the implementation of the algorithms?
To implement the different algorithms, you should know how the data structures work fundamentally, right? Like if you want to implement Prim's algorithm or Kruskal's algorithm, you need to know how graphs work, how to add nodes, how to navigate through the different paths. So I think unless you know the data structure, how will you be able to implement an algorithm on a data structure? So it's something that you need to do step by step, not completely go to the algorithms first. That's what I feel.
Great. After how much time, once the deadline of application had ended, did you receive the GOC link?
I received it. I think a week or two. A week, I think, within a week. But it
Great. I
depends. Some people had received it later, some people had received it before. So it depends.
Great. I think that answers all the questions in the chats. Divina, thank you so much for taking out time out of your busy schedule for taking this informative session. I'm sure it helped all the students and all the audience here to learn and get a insight into the selection process to step, and hopefully they learn from your experiences and the challenges that you faced and inspired them and motivated them to apply for step. Again, I would like to thank you for joining us for this session. I would also like to thank Shreyasi, Kritika, and, uh, and Rajshri for collaborating with MIT Manipal for having this session today, and all the audience for joining in and tuning in with all your great doubts and spending your time with GDSC to learn more about STEP.
Thank you so much, Shagan. It was a nice experience. And you can always reach out on LinkedIn to me or any of us. In fact, all of the girls who are the GDSC leads are incredibly helpful, and they're very knowledgeable and well established. So you can reach out to any of us in case of any doubts.
Yes, so guys, all the best to everyone. The application for STEP are already out. The deadline is 19 January. So be sure to apply in time and make use of all the tips you learned today. Thank you again for tuning in and joining us. That's it from GDSC.